Hi, this is your instructor, Teresa Pelkie. Welcome to our class. The HTML container elements are referred to as having what is called a box model. They have a margin, which is the space around the outside edges, a border, which is a way of enclosing it, and padding, which is the spaces on the inside. So if we take a look at the diagram here, we will see an example of the margin, border, and padding. The margin properties can be set in different ways. We can set them individually, which would be margin hyphen top, margin hyphen right, margin hyphen bottom, margin hyphen left. We can also use the margin property to set all four sides at the same value. So if you want different values, you need to use the individual properties. But we do have a shorthand. Using the margin property, we can identify four values. Notice these values are not comma separated. This allows us to set all four sides at varying values. Notice the order in which the values are listed. They are listed in clockwise order: top, right, bottom, left. This type of shorthand is relatively easy to remember. We also have a two-value shorthand. The first value would set the same value for the top and bottom. The second value would set the same value for the left and right. This is another popular way of indicating margins. The padding property. The syntax is essentially the same as for the margin property. We can set the four different values using padding top, padding right, padding bottom, padding left. The padding property will set all four sides the same value if we use one value. Here again we have the shorthand that allows us to set all four sides at different values, provided it follows the clockwise order. And we also have the two-value shorthand, so we can set the top and bottom and the right and left. The border properties. A border has a width, a style, and a color, and these three properties need to be set individually. New in CSS 3 is the border radius, the border image, and the box shadow. These give very nice effects to the border. So let's take a look at the border width property. Here we can set the four sides differently. The shorthand for the border hyphen width property is similar to the padding and margin property, where we can set all four sides at different values, provided they are listed in this clockwise order. We also have the two-value shorthand for the border width property, where we can set the top and bottom and also the right and left. The border color properties. We can set the color of the border. We can set it for the individual four sides. We also have the shorthand for the border hyphen color property. And here again it sets all four sides at different color values in this clockwise order. We also have the two-value shorthand, where we can set the top and bottom and the right and left. The border style property allows us to set different types of style. There are 9 different types: solid, dashed, dotted, double, and by the way, you need at least a 3-pixel high border to see the double border. There is outset, inset, groove, ridge, and we can set the border to none also. The border style properties follow the syntax similar to the border color and the border width properties. We also have the border style shortcut, which allows us to set all 4 sides differently, provided they are listed in the clockwise order. We also can set the border style using the 2-value shorthand, where we will set the top and bottom and the right and left. Now we have a shorthand that allows us to set the width and style and color for the border. The only drawback is that these properties will be the same for all 4 sides, and they have to go in this order: the width, the style, and the color. The border radius property allows us to create rounded corners, and this property is supported in most of the newer major browsers, although you will see some different syntax. Now, Firefox has a different implementation, and we have the -MOZ in front of it, and this is called a vendor prefix. Okay, so here we have ways of setting the individual 4 sides, and here we have a different syntax according to the W3C specification and the Firefox vendor prefix. And not only do we have the vendor prefix, but the property is different also. So if you wanted to use this, I would suggest coding with the W3C specification, and for Firefox, this is termed cross-browser coding. Now, IE8 will not see this, and therefore it will just ignore it. Okay, let's talk about centering. In order to center a div container, you need to have either the XHTML doc type or the HTML5 doc type. Now, as the browsers are released, this may change the need for the doc type, but in order to ensure cross-browser compatibility for other older browsers, you should have a doc type in there. You also need to have a width on the container. Finally, what we do is we set the left and the right margins to auto, and it would center the content because we know its width. Here is an example of centering a div using an inline style. How we lay out columns. What I would need to do is I would need to, first of all, have a width on the left container. I would also need to set the float property on the left container, so that would put the left container on the left-hand side of the page. Now, the right container does not need a float. Remember, when a float is set, the content underneath that element on which the float is set will come up and wrap alongside it. But when we're working with containers, we need to put a left margin on the right container that will be floating up that is at least the same width of the container it will float next to it. And I always add about 20 pixels to give you some room. So essentially, in order to allow it to float up, not only do we need the float property, but we need to have enough space so that it can clear that width with a little bit left over, and that is set in the left margin on the right container. And here we see how this is done in our tutorial 3 example. We have our 2 divs. The float is set on the left container. On the right container, we have a margin hyphen left property, which surpasses the width of the left-hand container. In this tutorial, in the div with the links, if you notice, there are no breaks. What the author is doing, they are setting the display property to block for the A tag. Now what that does, it allows our inline elements to function as a block level element. That allows us to be able to set margins. So rather than putting a break, which essentially is relative to the browser, we can set margins to change our spacing between the elements. Now remember, these box properties, margin, padding, and border, apply to block level elements. So sometimes we might want to change an inline element to a block level element, or vice versa. That is done using the display property.